Welcome back, Honors. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom. Welcome back to our discussion about the start of the Italian Renaissance, right? Very, very good job today in class. Great job on your quiz. Saw tons and tons of right answers. I'll get those things graded pretty fast and get them back into RenWeb and stuff like that. But let's not dawdle, right? Let's not sit around. Let's not dawdle. Let's not mess around because we've got a lot of stuff to cover in the next couple of days before we start your art presentations on Friday. And I mean on Friday, you're going to come in and we're going to start, all right? We're just getting after it, okay? So the big thing about it, though, is we left off in class talking about the major Italian cities and their contributions to the Renaissance, right? We started talking about the fact that, one, Italy is not like a united country at this point, right? It actually is a series of different principalities that are actually led by these different cities that make a ton of money and contribute to the growth of this Renaissance movement, right? Because we talked a lot about this in class today where it was just like, hey, you know, the Renaissance didn't just happen out of nowhere. A lot of it has to do with economics, right? That's why we focus a lot in on Venice, right? Being a trade and importer city because they were bringing in all those different goods from the Byzantine and the Ottomans, right? Now, why do I have the Byzantine and the Ottomans? Due to the fact that they were the Byzantinians, and then when they fell, they became the Ottomans, right? Because when the city of Constantinople falls, it turns into the Ottoman Empire. But do you remember back in the Middle Ages when we talked about Constantinople, now Istanbul, and we talked about all the products that you could find there, right? Teas, silks, porcelain, spices, like all those different things are now accessible to the people of Europe because of cities like Venice, right? That city that's built on the canals where you can literally move products so much easier. And then as all that stuff begins to move throughout Italy, it travels through Milan, which becomes a very massive trade hub. And to this day is still the wealthiest city in all of Italy, right? Actually, it's the banking and financial center as well. I went there over first quarter or sometime. Labor Day, yeah, exactly, to go to that wedding. And then this one right here, a picture of me and my wife out front of the Duomo right there, Florence. Florence is massively important, all right? Florence is big. It's known as the cradle of the Renaissance. They're responsible for making tons and tons of textiles. One family was also really responsible for discovering this product, right? Like there was a couple of mines discovered that had this stuff in it called alum, A-L-U-M, and it actually was used to dye different fabrics blue, right? And so textile production was really big in Florence. But then as time progressed, you also saw the creation of the first banks. And banking is a huge thing. Banking is liquid money that company or family is just going to use. And we'll talk more about banks, how they work and stuff like that in class when I actually have some time to explain it, okay? But the big thing about it, though, is we do have a fourth one. We have a fourth city that you kind of need to know about, and since you're honors, you do need to know about it. It's this city right smack in the middle, right? And it's centered around Rome. But we don't call it just Rome. We refer to it as the Papal States, right? Why do we call it the Papal States? Because it basically is a state or a district right smack in the middle of Italy that's governed and ruled over by the Catholic Church, right? As in, the Pope is basically their de facto monarch, right? The guy literally in charge of the Papal States is the Pope. Every time it changes over, they have a new leader and stuff like that. Some of these popes are going to be great. Some of them not so much, right? We'll talk a lot about a lot of different ones and stuff like that as we go forward. And Charlemagne is going to be the guy that helps establish that because he actually saved the Pope from an invasion and stuff like that, becomes the actual Holy Roman Emperor. Now, getting into it, though, okay? What we're about to talk about is so important, okay? So ridiculously, phenomenally important. And it's basically the crux of the entire Renaissance, right? It's this entire idea that revolves around the concept that these thinkers that are coming along, that are being financed in cities like Venice, Milan, Florence, and there's going to be some northern ones as well. You know, you're going to see some northern artists pop up, like Dutch artists and other things like that. But a lot of the hub of all this going on in the 1300s, during the late Middle Ages, right before the plague shows up and then immediately following, what ends up happening is a lot of these thinkers come along and they start re-examining old ideas. And in the process of re-examining old ideas, they start to discover new ones, right? And so there's a big thing that you got to use when you're talking about the Renaissance. You got to understand how much of this has to do with the growth in intelligence and, of course, in study, in the sciences, and arts, and literature, and so many other areas, right? Now, for example, I'm going to show you a couple of good examples of the concept that I'm about to talk about, okay? This right here, both of these drawings actually are from Leonardo da Vinci's journals, right? So Leonardo da Vinci would keep these massive journals, okay? And we have two of them that are in very good condition still, as historians and stuff like that. And one is his journals on science, and the other one is his journals on anatomy, right? And so big thing you need to understand, though, is he basically just wanted to know as much as he could, right? He wanted to know as much as he could to make his art as good as he could, to try and invent different things. He tried to invent flying machines. He technically invented the very first tank, all this other different stuff. And it's this idea that he wanted to know just so he could make, one, his art better, and two, Because he was curious, right? He wanted to know the world around him. He wanted to stop doing what middle-aged thinkers were doing, which is focusing on what happens when we die, because we don't even know that for sure, right? He said, I want to focus on the things I can study right here, right now, the secular world around me, right? For example, he dug up the body of a dead pregnant woman and did an autopsy on her and cut her open to see how the child that she lost when she died and stuff like that, because the mother and the child had died before the child was born, to see how the child was clutched up inside of the womb, right? He drew all of this in red chalk and wrote all of the information in a code and in backwards, so he actually couldn't get in trouble because it was technically against Catholic doctrine to dig up bodies like that, right? But why did he do this? Just because he wanted to know. And one of the best ideas to show you before we actually get into this concept is the Vitruvian Man, right? This dude right there, the Vitruvian Man, is a very famous sketch from one of Leonardo's journals, right? And you can tell he's writing it backwards right here and stuff like that, and it's also in that code. But the Vitruvian Man is used. It's named after this guy named Vitruvius, who is a Roman philosopher who talked about the proportions of the human body, right? Leonardo da Vinci drew them out. And he realized that the human form has certain proportions to it. For example, you are as tall as you are your arm span, fingertip to fingertip. That's your height, right? He also realized as well that the section right here from elbow to wrist is the size of your foot, right? He also realized that apparently nose to hairline and and chin to nose is about the same distance, right? Why would he do this? Why does he need to know the human proportions of the body? Because he is a humanist, right? Humanism is the idea the Renaissance revolves around, right? The concept that of worldly study and studying things that around them to understand and just learn more for the sake of learning it, right? Getting away from Catholic doctrine, getting away from their religion, getting away from all this other stuff. They just wanted to know, right? Because humanism, that concept of studying worldly subjects, focuses also on individual achievement and growth, right? He was like, I want to know this, not just for anybody else, but mostly just for me, right? I want to know this. I want to learn this. I want to get to understand this better. Now, really quickly, were there some thinkers like this during the Middle Ages? Yes, of course there were, right? The problem is nobody was financing them. Nobody was patroning them. Nobody was coming along and paying them. Now, by this point in history, with all of this money going in and out of Italy, we're seeing a massive growth in patronage and the paying of people who are intelligent to actually produce better products, right? And this is most visible in the explosion of art, right? The humanist perspective is most visible in that explosion of art and also in the study and personal studies of Leonardo da Vinci like we just talked about, right? But the big thing about it, though, is this is a title right down here, by the way, the Italian Renaissance. Why do we always call this the Italian Renaissance? Well, mostly due to the fact that it happened in Italy, right? But why Italy? Why Italy in particular, right? Somebody, I think it was Caitlin Strimlau in class, guessed that it was in Italy, right? Or she said France or something like that. I can't remember. But the big thing about it, though, in general, is that you got to understand that Italy is going to be that home to the early part of the Renaissance. It's going to be massively important due to the fact, for a lot of different reasons. I'm going to give you about 5 or 6 right now, okay? 1, Italy is the home of the former Roman Empire, right? Rome, the city of Rome, the thing that's being reborn in the Renaissance period, was located in Italy. So of course it's going to take place in Italy, right? Also, another big thing is that many ruins and artifacts are still around and in very good condition for interpretation and understanding, right? For example, Haley Ruther, we were talking about your building that you're doing for your artwork presentation and stuff like that for your project. And that guy, Filippo Brunelleschi, went off and studied Roman buildings that were still there so he could better understand how to build that Renaissance dome that he wanted to build so badly, right? Also, it's a massive center for trade, right? Italy is a huge center for trade and a massive crossroads of different items coming in and out of other areas, right? And are there other reasons? Yeah, there are a couple of other reasons, right? We got about 3 more, okay? The big thing about it that you need to know is the Papal States, right? The Papal States being home to the Catholic Church in Italy is a really big reason why the Renaissance started there, because the Catholic Church by this point is making tons and tons and buttloads of money, okay? They got lots and lots of money coming in right now. So what is the Catholic Church going to do with a lot of that money? They're going to paint their churches. They're going to beautify these cathedrals. They're going to try and actually fund different projects that are going on in the Vatican, right? For example, one of the most famous ones, the Sistine Chapel ceiling by Michelangelo, right? That literal ceiling that costs millions of dollars that has the fingertips of Adam and God about to touch each other and stuff like that in the creation of Adam. That right there is a piece of Renaissance art that was funded and patroned directly by the Catholic Church, right? Also, the European continent's center for banking at the time was literally in Italy, patroned by one very famous family. Now, speaking of, though, I keep saying this word patron. I keep saying patron, 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 patron. I'm repeating it over and over again, right? Because that's another big reason, and probably the most important reason why the Renaissance went down in, like, Italy. Because the growth of patrons, right? These massively important people, groups of people, families, individuals that paid for all of it, right? So here's the big thing about it. There are a lot of famous people and a lot of very wealthy people that are in Italy at this point, okay? And they're going to want to buy art. They're going to want to show it off. They're going to want to fund the re-beautification of cathedrals. They're going to want to fund the reconstruction of them. They're going to want to fund different artworks that will go in their homes so they can show off to people and stuff like that. That's the biggest number of them are in Italy and coming in and out of Italy as merchants and also as guilds as well. Some of the guilds in Italy actually paid for a lot of this early artwork. But the most famous of all the families is the Medici family of Florence, right? The Medici family from Florence is the informal and formal rulers of Florence. The number of artworks that we're presenting on that were bought by the Medici family is almost half, right? So most of you have probably come across this name already, right? And it's Medici, not Medici, okay? The Medici family, all right? The Medici family, that informal and formal ruler of Florence family, they were the ones that started the most powerful bank that Europe had seen up until this point, right? They created a huge bank that made them tons of profit and made them very, very powerful. Because if you came to them and deposited your money with them and were like, hey, please keep this safe for us, what did they do? They did do that. They kept it safe for you. But they also spent it. So something that you need to understand about banks is that they are a money-making institution, right? And they are going to sit there and try their best to use whatever money that they have around. And so the big thing about it is they created a very powerful bank. And the merchant guilds of Venice, the trading guilds of Milan, the wool merchants guild of Florence and stuff like that starts depositing their revenues in these banks, makes the Medicis fabulously wealthy, so they start buying art, buying up positions, and also moving up in the political ranks as well. And they are huge patrons of major artworks, right? And there's several famous ones. This guy right here, Cosimo the Elder, is one of the biggest ones that started the progression of Renaissance patronage. But this dude right there is probably the most important one out of all of them. His name is Lorenzo il Magnifico, which is actually the Magnificent in Italian, right? Medici. Lorenzo Medici was so famous that he bought several of these different artworks, right? He bought the Birth of Venus. He bought the Primavera. He bought the Birth of Venus apparently as a wedding gift and stuff like that. Birth of Venus was also almost destroyed, fun fact. But the biggest thing about it in general is that you had to, he also even let young Michelangelo live at his home. He patroned also not only visual artists, but writers and philosophers as well. So the thing about it is the Medici family of Florence, they're our best example of that patronage concept, right? Now, really quickly though too, what's going on with all this art that's making it so much better than the Middle Ages art that came before it? Well, first and foremost, you got to understand that Renaissance art is just much more stylized, right? It's much more beautiful and clean and symmetrical. It also interprets motion. You can actually see in so many different pieces of these artworks, it looks as though the characters are in mid-movement, and we've just snapped them in a moment in time, right? That we've just almost taken a picture in an image. Whereas Middle Ages art was very static and very, very not nearly as good, right? Now, it also represented humans in landscapes much better than Middle Ages art that had come before it. Perspective was also used as well. Real life art that's going to have depth and proportions and a lot of other things as well. You're also going to see shading, which is going to make art look more textured and much more real. And then you're also going to see another thing as well, the reemergence of quality, motion significant sculptures, right? You've got the David, the Pieta, Perseus holding the head of Medusa by Cellini. You've got all these major works. Oh, Giampollona's the abduction of the Sabines, right? All these different artworks that are coming along that are reinterpreting the old styles of the Romans, right? Remember, this right here is Augustus, okay? This was actually created and made in the Roman Empire while Augustus was alive, right? I've seen the statue. It's in Vatican City. It's absolutely beautiful, but look how gorgeous this thing is. Proportional, a fantastic rendition of this human being that did exist in time, right? And then look at this artwork. This is the Middle Ages. Wow, that's garbage. All right, so like apparently this is supposed to be like Charlemagne and stuff like that, right, when he was young. It's got no depth. It's got no background. It's got no landscape. All these people got the same face, right? So like also they got long fingers. Just like this one right here. This is later Middle Ages art of Mary and Christ. Also, again, very heavily religiously themed and stuff like that. Flat, not proportional. Eyes are out of proportion. Like doesn't look right. This was made in ancient Rome, right? Do we see what I'm saying right here? Like the art is just getting so much better. And then this is a painting from the Renaissance. That is the birth of Venus, right? And then this right here is Botticelli's, Madonna and Pomegranate, which is another beautiful piece of art, right? Which has the symbolism of the Sacred Heart right here in this pomegranate. But we'll talk more about that when I see y'all in class, all right? Y'all have a great one.